What occurs when the hunter transforms into the hunted? When those convinced of their absolute power suddenly realize they've stumbled directly into death's own Miaotren. Tonight we venture into the mist-shrouded marshes of Georgia, where a band of slave catchers believed they were pursuing vulnerable quarry, only to discover they'd encountered the deadliest marksmen the Union forces had ever produced. If narratives of righteousness, endurance, and extraordinary bravery resonate deep within your soul, strike that subscribe button immediately, because the account you're about to hear will render you absolutely speechless. The Georgian marshland possessed an animate quality all its own during that October evening in 1863. Spanish moss dangled like spectral drapes from timeless cypress trees, while humidity saturated every breath of air, clinging persistently to whatever it contacted. The moon, barely discernible through the leafy canopy, and rising fog, cast pale silver fragments across the dark waters that reflected like fractured glass. 5 individuals navigated this primeval landscape carrying the self-assurance of predators who had never experienced genuine fear. They were slave trackers, bounty seekers, who earned their livelihood pursuing those who sought freedom and forcibly returning them to plantations that claimed ownership over human beings. Their commander, a scarred individual named Jeremiah Colt, carried a lantern projecting dancing shadows across his weathered countenance. Colt had practiced this trade for over 15 years, ever since returning from the Mexican conflict with a bullet, shattered leg, and a spirit brimming with resentment. The plantation owners compensated him handsomely for his efforts, occasionally reaching $500 for particularly valuable escapees. He had established himself as someone who never abandoned a pursuit, never returned without results, and never extended compassion toward those daring to claim themselves from supposed owners. "Impressions are recent," murmured Tommy Briggs, the youngest member, his voice scarcely audible above the chorus of crickets and tree frogs. He crouched beside a barely detectable footprint in the damp earth, tracing its outline with his fingers. Probably less than 60 minutes ahead. Tommy was merely 22, offspring of an impoverished cultivator who had joined Colt's operation 6 months earlier, when wartime had made legitimate employment impossible. He possessed keen observation skills for tracking and exceptionally swift reflexes with his Colt Navy revolver. The experienced men regarded him almost as a mascot, yet Tommy burned to demonstrate his worthiness of their esteem. This night, he believed, would provide his opportunity. Colt expelled tobacco juice into the murky water beside him. The brown liquid vanished into the shadowy depth. "Excellent. Been pursuing this one for 3 days. Plantation masters offering 200. Claims this fellow possesses particular abilities they require restored." He chuckled, a sound entirely lacking warmth. "Special talents won't rescue him currently." The plantation owner, Colonel Bogart Ashford, had been remarkably insistent regarding this particular escapee. The man they hunted had served as his personal metalsmith, capable of producing everything from horseshoes to rifle barrels with extraordinary precision. Yet beyond that, Ashford suspected the runaway had been facilitating other slaves' escapes, utilizing his relatively trusted position to accumulate intelligence and plan northern routes. The third man, Marcus Webb, adjusted the rope coiled across his shoulder and examined his pistol for the 3rd time within the hour. Certain it's merely one individual, prints appear purposeful, almost inviting pursuit. Webb possessed an inherently anxious disposition, intensified by 3 years of tracking human beings through some of the South's most treacherous landscape. He had witnessed what desperate individuals could accomplish when trapped, carried scars validating that truth. Something about this particular pursuit felt different, though he couldn't precisely identify what. Obviously he desires us to follow," sneered Pike Morrison, the most substantial of the group, his massive frame causing the wooden pathway to groan beneath his weight. "They consistently flee to the marsh, believing it will conceal them. Yet we understand these waters better than any escapee." Pike stood 6 feet 4 inches and approached 300 pounds, predominantly muscle developed through years of physical labor, before he realized that pursuing humans yielded better returns than honest work. He carried a double-barreled shotgun capable of dropping a man at 50 yards, and he had never encountered a fugitive who could withstand him in equitable combat. Naturally, Pike had never subscribed to fighting fairly. The fifth individual, Samuel Cross, remained characteristically silent. He served as their pathfinder, someone who could pursue a trail through perdition itself. Cross had acquired his abilities hunting Seminole people in Florida's Everglades, where a solitary misstep could mean death from arrow or alligator. He possessed cold, colorless eyes that appeared to perceive everything, and thin lips that rarely parted unless he possessed something significant to communicate. Yet tonight something felt different. The customary indicators of panic, of desperate flight, were absent. Instead, the footprints revealed measured steps, deliberate placement, the gait of someone who understood precisely his destination. Cross had observed tracks, like these previously during the Seminole conflicts, when he had been the pursued rather than the pursuer. As they penetrated deeper into the marsh, the mist intensified, muffling their voices and erasing the world beyond their lantern light entirely. The water lapped gently against cypress knees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called with haunting resonance that seemed to echo their own mortality. The swamp pulsated with sounds speaking of ancient mysteries and concealed perils. Alligators glided through water with barely perceptible ripples, their eyes glowing like amber embers in the darkness. Serpents dangled from branches like living cords, and the very atmosphere seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of something immense and primeval. "There." Cross finally spoke, indicating ahead where a faint orange glow flickered through the trees. "Campfire, half-mile, perhaps less." Colt's eyes gleamed with anticipation, the identical expression he wore when approaching collection of an especially substantial bounty. "Perfect." Probably established himself a small camp, believing he's secure. He turned to his men, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We surround him quietly. Capture alive if feasible, dead if necessary. Either approach, we're collecting that payment tonight." The men began dispersing, each assuming positions that would enable them to encircle the distant fire. They moved with practiced efficiency of predators who had performed this dance numerous times previously. Tommy Briggs felt his heart accelerate with excitement, while Marcus Webb suppressed the nervous fluttering in his stomach. Pike Morrison cracked his knuckles in anticipation, and Samuel Cross simply dissolved into the shadows like vapor. Yet as they advanced toward the distant flame, none observed the figure that had been monitoring them from the darkness for the past hour. High among the branches of an ancient oak, perfectly motionless and nearly indistinguishable against the bark, a man observed their every movement through the scope of a rifle that had terminated more Confederate existences than any other weapon in the Union military. His identity was Isaiah Freeman, though the soldiers who had fought beside him recognized him simply as Ghost. At 32 years old, he had fled bondage only to find himself immersed in a conflict that would determine the destiny of millions, sharing his circumstances. The Union forces had provided him a firearm and discovered they had unleashed something remarkable. A man whose precision had become so legendary that Confederate officers had placed $1,000 bounty on his head alone. Isaiah had been born on the very plantation from which he escaped, son of a woman who perished delivering him, and a father he never knew. He had matured in the slave quarters, learning early that survival demanded invisibility, usefulness, and never, ever revealing the intelligence burning behind his dark eyes. Yet the master's son had perceived something in the young slave, and had secretly taught him reading and writing, a kindness that would later preserve Isaiah's existence when he needed to forge travel documents during his escape. That same young master had also instructed him in marksmanship, taking him hunting in these very marshes, never imagining he was training someone who would eventually employ those skills against everything the plantation system represented. Isaiah's dark eyes tracked the slave hunter's movements with the patience of a predator who had learned that survival meant thinking 3 steps beyond death itself. His weathered hands, steady as stone, held the rifle that had pronounced justice across numerous battlefields. Tonight it would speak once more. The campfire the hunters had spotted wasn't his. It belonged to a refugee family he had been guiding northward. People who had trusted him to lead them toward freedom. An elderly couple, their teenage daughter, and 2 young boys who still believed the world could offer kindness. They huddled around that small flame, unaware that death was approaching through the mist. But death would have to pass through Isaiah Freeman initially. As the slave hunters crept nearer to their intended victims, Isaiah initiated his own pursuit. He moved through the trees like smoke, each step calculated, each breath controlled. Warfare had taught him that occasionally the sole method of protecting the innocent was transforming yourself into something terrible. The mist swirled around him as he positioned himself for what approached. In the distance, he could overhear Colt's harsh whisper, issuing commands to his men. They were spreading out, preparing to surround the campfire, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. They had no concept they were walking into the crosshairs of the most dangerous individual within the Georgia marshes. Isaiah inspected his rifle one final time, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon that had become an extension of his very being. The Springfield had been modified by Union armorers specifically for extended range work. The barrel had been meticulously rifled for maximum precision. The trigger had been adjusted to a hair's breadth of sensitivity, and the scope had been crafted by Massachusetts' finest lens makers. Yet the rifle remained only as effective as the man wielding it, and Isaiah Freeman had been forged in flames that would have shattered lesser individuals. Every shot he had taken in this conflict had been for freedom, his own, his people's, and the very essence of a nation finally prepared to fulfill its founding promises. Tonight, 5 additional shots would resonate in justice's name. The refugee family clustered tightly around their modest fire, attempting to extract warmth from flames that seemed barely capable of holding back the marsh's overwhelming darkness. Martha Washington, not her authentic name, but the designation she had selected for herself when she determined to be free, stirred thin soup crafted from roots and remnants of dried meat. Her husband, Samuel, kept his arm around their daughter, Rebecca, while their 2 boys, David and little Thomas, dozed fitfully against his side. Martha was 43, having expended most of her existence in bondage on a rice plantation near Savannah. She had been separated from her initial husband when he was sold to settle gambling debts, and had witnessed 2 of her children disappear into Charleston's slave markets before age 25. The family surrounding this fire represented everything remaining in her world, and she would perish before permitting anyone to remove them. Samuel Washington had functioned as a carpenter on the same plantation, sufficiently skilled that his master hired him out to other properties for additional income. During one such assignment, he had encountered Martha, and they had married in a simple ceremony within the slave quarters. Understanding their union possessed no legal standing, yet meaning everything to them regardless. Their daughter Rebecca, now 16, had inherited her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's steady hands. She had been learning to read secretly using a Bible that Martha had concealed beneath their cabin's floorboards. The girl dreamed of becoming an educator someday, helping other freed slaves master the letters and numbers that would provide power in the world beyond bondage. David, at 12, was sufficiently mature to comprehend their danger, yet young enough to still believe good would triumph over evil. He possessed his father's build and his mother's eyes, watching the darkness beyond their fire with the alertness of someone who had learned early that safety was never guaranteed. Little Thomas, merely 8, still perceived their journey as adventure. He didn't fully understand why they had departed the sole home he had ever known, or why they traveled nocturnally and concealed themselves during daylight. All he comprehended was that his family remained together, and the quiet man with the rifle had promised to protect them.
"How much further, Mama?"
Rebecca whispered, her voice carrying exhaustion from 3 weeks of flight. Martha examined her daughter's face, observing the wariness there, yet also the determination that had carried them this distance. "Not much longer, baby girl," she replied, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "The man guiding us, he understands these marshes like his own hand. He'll deliver us to the Union lines." Samuel squeezed his daughter closer, feeling responsibility's weight accompanying his role as family protector in such desperate circumstances. "That man preserved our lives at the river crossing. If he declares we're secure here tonight, then we're secure." The river crossing Samuel referenced had occurred 3 days earlier when a Confederate patrol had nearly captured them, fording a stream 20 miles south of their current position. Isaiah had materialized from nowhere, emerging from morning mist like an avenging spirit, guiding them to safety through a series of concealed channels and forgotten pathways that only someone with intimate marsh knowledge could have known. Yet even as Samuel spoke reassuring words, he felt unease settling over their small camp. The marsh had grown excessively quiet. The natural sounds of nocturnal creatures faded to ominous silence that made his skin crawl. He had spent sufficient time in these waters as a young man, hunting and fishing to supplement the meager rations provided by their master, to recognize when something was wrong. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks upward into misty air, where they vanished like dying stars. The soup Martha stirred smelled of wild onions and cattail roots, flavored with a small piece of salt pork Isaiah had shared from his own provisions. It wasn't much, yet it was warm and filling, reminding them they remained alive, remained free, remained moving toward a better future. 300 yards distant, Jeremiah Colt and his men had assumed their positions. They formed a loose circle surrounding the campfire, each concealed behind cypress trees and fallen logs, weapons ready. Colt could discern the refugees' silhouettes clearly now. A family, precisely as he had anticipated. Vulnerable targets. Colt crouched behind a massive cypress root, his rifle trained on the campfire. He could distinguish individual figures now. An older woman stirring something over flames, a man with his arm around what appeared a teenage girl, and at least 2 smaller shapes that must be children. The sight filled him with satisfaction, rather than any trace of human sympathy. Each person surrounding that fire represented currency in his pocket, and currency was the sole object mattering to Jeremiah Colt. "Upon my signal," he whispered into darkness, confident his men could hear. "Remember, we desire them alive if feasible. Deceased fugitives don't generate bounties, Yet damaged merchandise still yields something. Tommy Briggs, positioned east of the camp, felt his heart racing with anticipation. This represented merely his third pursuit, and the chase's excitement still thrilled him. He gripped his pistol tighter, imagining the praise he would receive when they dragged these escapees back to civilization. In his youthful mind, he performed a societal service, returning stolen property to legitimate owners. Tommy had grown impoverished on a struggling farm where his family had barely scratched existence from red clay soil that seemed to resist every cultivation attempt. When Colt had offered him opportunity to earn more monthly than his father earned annually, it had appeared a gift from Providence. The fact that this income derived from hunting human beings was something Tommy had learned to suppress. Marcus Webb, crouched behind a fallen log, found himself contemplating the $200 they would divide, sufficient to sustain him in whiskey and card games for months. He had ceased considering their quarry as people long ago. They were merely merchandise that had wandered off, requiring return to rightful owners. Webb had once been a soldier, had fought alongside Colt in the Mexican War, yet the things witnessed there had left him hollow. He drank to forget faces of men killed in combat, and he hunted runaway slaves, because it proved easier than confronting the reality that he had transformed into someone unrecognizable when viewing his reflection. Pike Morrison's massive frame was concealed behind a fallen log, his shotgun loaded with buckshot that would spread sufficiently to bring down multiple targets with single discharge. He contemplated potential resistance. The man they pursued was supposedly dangerous, yet Pike had never encountered a fugitive capable of standing against 5 armed white men. Tonight would prove no different. Pike had been a slave overseer before joining Colt's crew, a position requiring physical intimidation and absolute absence of mercy. He had whipped men and women for minor infractions, separated families without second thought, and convinced himself he maintained order within a natural, righteous system. The notion that his former victims might retaliate was something he refused to consider. Samuel Cross, the tracker, experienced familiar calm preceding action. He had positioned himself with clear view of the entire camp, prepared to intercept any escape routes. His rifle targeted the fire, awaiting Colt's signal. Cross was arguably the group's most dangerous member, not due to physical strength or weaponry, but because of his complete emotional detachment from their impending actions. Cross had learned to kill without feeling during the Seminole conflicts, where mercy represented a luxury that could leave you scalped and abandoned for buzzards. He had carried that coldness into civilian life, and it had served him well in his chosen profession. To Cross, the individuals surrounding that campfire were simply targets for acquisition, indistinguishable from deer hunted as a boy, yet none observed the shadow moving through trees above them. Isaiah Freeman had expended the last hour studying each hunter's position, memorizing their locations, calculating angles and distances. From his perch in the ancient oak, he could perceive the entire battlefield spread below like deadly chess game. The refugees beside the fire were the king and queen requiring protection. The slave hunters were pieces requiring removal from the board. His rifle, a customized Springfield modified by Union armorers specifically for extended range accuracy, was loaded with .58 caliber mini-ball capable of dropping a man at 600 yards. At this distance, with these targets, it would resemble shooting fish in a barrel. Isaiah had learned marksmanship on this very plantation, instructed by the master's son, who had perceived potential in the young slave and decided to cultivate it. Those early lessons had concerned hunting deer and wild boar, yet principles remained identical: patience, precision, and ability to remain absolutely motionless for hours. Warfare had refined those skills into something far deadlier. Isaiah had served as sniper with the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, the renowned colored regiment that had demonstrated black men could fight as effectively as any white soldiers. His reputation had expanded with each successful mission, each impossible shot eliminating Confederate officers or disrupting enemy operations. Yet Isaiah had learned something during his years of combat. Separating him from ordinary soldiers' patience proved deadlier than any projectile. He would await the perfect moment, when his enemies revealed themselves completely, when escape and mercy would be impossible. The moment arrived when Colt raised his lantern, preparing to signal attack. Isaiah's initial shot shattered night like thunder. The bullet struck Colt in the chest, spinning him and sending the lantern flying into dark water, where it hissed and perished. The slave hunter leader collapsed without sound, eyes wide with shock and confusion. In his final moments, Jeremiah Colt realized he had become the hunted, and his hunter was far more skilled than he had ever been. "What the hell?" Pike Morrison began shouting, yet his words were terminated by Isaiah's rifle chambering another round. The sound echoed through the marsh like judgment's voice itself. In that instant, remaining hunters realized they confronted not a frightened escapee, but something far more dangerous. The confidence that had carried them through dozens of successful hunts evaporated like mist under morning sun. The second shot arrived 3 seconds later, finding Tommy Briggs as he attempted scrambling for better cover. The young hunter pitched forward into swamp water, his dreams of easy currency sinking with him beneath the dark surface. His final thought concerned his mother, awaiting his return with sufficient money to preserve the family farm. Panic erupted among remaining hunters. Marcus Webb fired wildly into trees, his muzzle flash revealing his position for a fatal instant. Isaiah's third shot silenced him permanently, the bullet finding its mark with divine retribution's precision. "Where is he?" Pike Morrison roared, his shotgun sweeping back and forth as he searched for undetectable target. "Where the hell is he?" The massive man's voice cracked with fear, an emotion he had never permitted himself when holding the whip, when possessing all power. Now, for initial time in his existence, Pike Morrison understood what it felt like to be hunted, to exist at the mercy of someone who perceived him as subhuman. Samuel Cross, the tracker, was sole individual comprehending what transpired. "It's him," he whispered, voice filled with unprecedented terror. "It's the one we pursued. He's been pursuing us." Cross had witnessed this precision previously during Seminole conflicts, when enemy warriors had eliminated his patrol members one by one from undetectable positions. Yet this was different. This was personal. This wasn't merely military tactics or territorial disputes. This concerned justice, and Cross recognized that justice had finally arrived for men like him. The refugees surrounding the campfire had thrown themselves flat at initial gunshot. Martha covered her children with her body, while Samuel attempted shielding them all. They could hear conflict raging around them, yet in darkness and mist, they couldn't distinguish who fought whom. Little Thomas whimpered softly, his 8-year-old mind unable to process violence exploding around their peaceful fire. Rebecca held her little brother close, whispering prayers learned from her grandmother, while David attempted bravery for his family. Even as his own heart hammered with terror, Isaiah moved through trees like vengeful spirit, relocating after each shot, utilizing confusion and darkness to advantage. He had learned this deadly dance on battlefields of Antietam and Gettysburg, where Confederate sharpshooters had attempted hunting him just as these men attempted hunting innocent people seeking freedom. Each shot was calculated not merely for accuracy, but for psychological effect. Isaiah wanted remaining hunters to recognize they were being stalked, to experience identical terror their victims had felt. He wanted them to comprehend in final moments what it meant to be prey. Pike Morrison, desperate and terrified, made error of breaking cover. He charged toward where he believed shots originated, his massive frame crashing through underbrush like wounded bear. Isaiah's fourth shot dropped him 20 feet from refugees' campfire, his shotgun falling harmlessly into mud. As Pike fell, his final sight was the family he had come to capture, huddled together in terror around their small fire. For initial time in his existence, he perceived them not as property, but as human beings. Mother protecting children, father attempting shielding family, young people whose sole crime had been desiring freedom. The realization arrived too late to preserve his soul, yet arrived nonetheless. That left only Samuel Cross. The tracker was group's most intelligent and most dangerous. He had found cover behind thick cypress trunk and was waiting, listening, attempting locating invisible enemy through sound alone. Cross was veteran of Indian conflicts and border disputes. He understood hunting men who didn't wish to be found, yet he had never hunted anyone resembling Isaiah Freeman. Cross pressed his back against rough bark of ancient cypress, his rifle held ready across his chest, pale eyes sweeping darkness, searching for any movement indication, any hint of next shot's origin. He had experienced situations like this previously, during brutal campaigns against Seminoles in Florida Everglades, where single mistake meant death from arrow or alligator. The tracker's mind raced through possibilities. Shots had originated from different positions, meaning their enemy was mobile, probably moving through trees above ground level. Accuracy suggested military training, probably Union Army, given precision and tactical awareness. Yet most disturbing was attack's methodical nature. This wasn't panic or desperation. This was calculated execution. Cross had built reputation on reading signs others couldn't perceive, following trails seeming impossible to track. He could determine what a man had eaten for breakfast, examining footprints, predict where fugitive would go next, understanding psychology of fear and desperation. Yet tonight he was being read, predicted, hunted by someone understanding the game better than he did. Silence stretched between them, broken only by gentle water lapping and distant calls of nightbirds returning to interrupted songs. Cross knew his sole chance was awaiting enemy's mistake, some revelation. Yet as minutes ticked past, he began realizing his opponent possessed greater patience, greater discipline, greater lethality. Isaiah recognized this as well. He also understood that every delayed second represented another second refugees remained endangered. Yet rushing would result in all their deaths. So he performed something unexpected. He began moving, not away from Cross but toward him, circling through trees with predator's patience, possessing all night for hunt completion. From nude position, Isaiah could perceive Cross clearly. The tracker was skilled. He had selected excellent cover and maintained proper discipline. Yet he had committed one crucial error. He was thinking like hunter, when he should have thought like prey. Cross awaited Isaiah's revelation when he should have attempted escape. Isaiah had learned this lesson on Virginia battlefields, where Confederate sharpshooters had attempted hunting him through burned town ruins and shell-cratered fields. Survivors understood that occasionally best defense was becoming aggressor, turning hunt back upon hunter. Moving with infinite care, Isaiah positioned himself for final shot. He could perceive Cross's profile now, etched against faint glow of distant campfire. The tracker still scanned darkness, still awaited enemy mistake that would never arrive. Cross heard soft sound of boot on wet earth and spun toward it. firing into darkness. The muzzle flash illuminated his face for an instant, and in that instant Isaiah perceived everything necessary: tracker's position, posture, exact angle required for clean kill. Final shot echoed across marsh like judgment from heaven itself. Samuel Cross pitched forward into dark water, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. As life faded from pale eyes, he finally understood what his victims had felt in final moments: helplessness, terror, knowledge that death approached with nothing possible to prevent it. Silence fell over Georgia Marsh like burial shroud. Acrid gunpowder smell mixed with earthy moss and stagnant water scent, creating atmosphere thick with sudden death's weight. 5 men who had entered these waters as hunters now lay motionless beneath Spanish moss, their weapons scattered and useless in mud. Isaiah Freeman remained motionless in trees for full 10 minutes following final shot, his rifle trained on darkness, listening for any indication of approaching hunters. His breathing was controlled, heartbeat steady, calm of a man who had danced with death so frequently it had become natural as walking. Refugees around campfire remained frozen in terror, uncertain whether shooting had concluded or they were about becoming next victims. Martha held her children close, her body shielding them from whatever horror might emerge from darkness. Samuel kept arms around family, ready to fight barehanded if necessary, protecting them. Only when certain threat had passed did Isaiah begin descending from ancient oak that had served as fortress. His movements were fluid and silent, each step calculated, avoiding slightest sound that might alarm refugees still huddled around dying campfire. As boots touched soft earth, Isaiah could hear whispered prayers and muffled sobs from family he had protected. They had no concept who had saved them, or even if truly saved at all. For all they knew, they had simply witnessed one group of white men kill another, with their own fate remaining uncertain. Isaiah approached campfire slowly, emerging from mist like dream figure. His rifle was held low but ready, dark eyes sweeping perimeter once more before permitting slight relaxation. Firelight played across his face, revealing scars and weathered features of a man who had witnessed excessive war, excessive death, excessive injustice. Martha Washington was initial person, spotting figure emerging from mist. She had been clutching children close, eyes scanning darkness for any movement indication when she perceived him. Tall, lean man with skin as dark as her own, carrying rifle appearing extension of his very soul. Samuel, she whispered to husband, voice barely audible. Look. Samuel Washington raised head and found himself staring into eyes of man who had been guiding them northward for past 3 weeks. Yet this wasn't quiet, gentle soul who had shared meager meals and told stories to children around previous campfires. This was someone else entirely, someone forged in war's fires and tempered by survival's necessity. The transformation was startling. Isaiah Freeman, who had guided them through safe passages and shared knowledge of edible plants, remained present, yet overlaid with something harder, more dangerous. This was ghost that Confederate soldiers whispered about in camps. Sniper who could kill at impossible distances and vanish like smoke. Mr. Freeman, Rebecca whispered, young voice trembling with mixture of fear and awe. Isaiah approached fire slowly, his rifle held low but ready. Dark eyes swept perimeter, once more before permitting slight relaxation. When he spoke, voice carried weight of what had just transpired, yet also gentleness reminding them of man who had protected them throughout. It's finished, he stated simply. They'll hunt no one ever again. Little Thomas, merely 8, peeked from behind mother's protective embrace. His young mind struggled processing what had occurred, yet he understood that quiet man, who had been telling freedom stories, had just performed something terrible, yet necessary, preserving their safety. Were those bad men, Mr. Freeman? The ones wanting taking us back? Isaiah knelt beside fire, setting rifle within easy reach. Flames cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting scars marking him as countless battle veteran. His expression softened regarding the child, remembering his own innocence lost so many years earlier. Yes, son, they were bad men, yet they cannot harm you now. Martha studied man who had preserved their lives. Perceiving him clearly perhaps for initial time, she had known he differed from other guides assisting refugees along underground railroad. Something in his eyes spoke of experiences beyond her imagination. Now she understood what that something was. His bearing, casual weapon competence. Calm surrounding him even after taking 5 lives. These were professional soldiers' marks, someone who had learned killing efficiently and without hesitation when circumstances demanded. "You're a soldier," she stated. Not question, but recognition statement. Isaiah nodded slowly, eyes reflecting firelight like dark mirrors. Was a soldier. Still am, I suppose. When necessity arises. He gestured toward darkness where slave hunter bodies lay. Those men earned livelihood stealing freedom from people like us. Tonight, they paid price for that choice. Those words' weight settled over small group like blanket. These were people who had expended entire lives under violence threat, taught from birth that their existence held no value beyond utility to masters. To witness that violence turned against oppressors, to observe justice delivered with such swift and terrible efficiency was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Samuel Washington found voice at last, though it emerged barely more than whisper. How many were there? 5. Isaiah replied without emotion. All deceased. We're secure temporarily, yet we must move. Gunshots carry far in marsh, and others might exist. As if summoned by words, distant voices drifted through mist. Isaiah's head snapped up, hand moving instinctively to rifle. Yet these voices differed. They carried cadence of men calling in concern rather than aggression. Disciplined soldier tones, rather than harsh bounty hunter shouts. "Hello, the camp," came shout from darkness. Sergeant Mills, 54th Massachusetts Infantry. Heard shooting. Isaiah relaxed slightly, though kept rifle ready. The 54th Massachusetts was colored regiment, one of initial officially recognized African-American units in Union Army. If they were in area, Union lines were closer than he had dared hope. "Here," Isaiah called back, voice carrying command, accustomed authority. Refugees and escort approaching. Relief in his voice was palpable, and Washington family felt some tension leave shoulders for initial time in weeks. They approached safety, approached freedom, approached conclusion of long and dangerous journey. Within minutes, 6 Union soldier patrol emerged from mist, blue uniforms dark with swamp water and rifles ready. Their leader, grizzled sergeant with kind eyes and graying hair, surveyed scene with veterans' practiced gaze who had witnessed excessive war for anything to surprise. Sergeant Mills. Man introduced himself, then paused as eyes fell on Isaiah's rifle. The weapon was distinctive, longer than standard infantry rifles, with telescopic sight marking it as sniper's tool. Recognition dawned in Sergeant's eyes. "Wait moment. I recognize that weapon. You're Freeman, correct?" The ghost. Isaiah stood slowly, suddenly aware reputation had preceded him even into these remote marshes. Legend's weight was something he had never grown comfortable with, preferring quiet work without fanfare. "I am." Soldiers around Sergeant Mills straightened with obvious respect. Even in dim firelight, Isaiah could perceive awe in faces. These men had heard stories, tales of Union sniper who could kill Confederate officers at impossible distances, who had turned battle tides with single perfectly placed shot. "Sir," Sergeant Mills said, voice filled with genuine reverence. "It's honor. We've sought you for weeks. Command desires debriefing, regarding Confederate positions in this sector. The sergeant was a career soldier who had served in regular army before war, and he had witnessed sufficient combat recognizing true warrior when encountered. Yet something more than professional respect existed in voice. There was awe reserved for men who had become legends during their own time. Isaiah glanced at refugee family, watching exchange with growing hope and confusion. They had known Guide was special, yet only now began understanding just how special. These people require reaching safety initially, Sergeant. They've endured enough. Simple statement revealed everything about Isaiah's character. Despite fearsome reputation, despite Union commanders actively seeking him, his initial concern remained civilians under protection. This wasn't behavior of man corrupted by war, but of someone who had discovered true purpose protecting innocent. Certainly, sir. We've camped approximately 2 miles north, directly on Union territory edge. These folks will be secure there, and we can arrange passage northward to freedom. Sergeant Mills turned to men, issuing quiet orders ensuring Washington family's safe passage to Union lines. Soldiers moved with well-trained unit efficiency. Yet Isaiah could perceive excitement in eyes. They existed in living legend's presence, and they recognized it as soldiers began assisting Washington family gathering meager possessions. Young David tugged Isaiah's sleeve. Boy had remained quiet throughout ordeal, yet now curiosity overcame fear. "Mr. Freeman, are you genuinely famous?" Isaiah knelt to boy's level, stern expression softening as always when addressing children. Despite everything witnessed and performed, he still believed in innocence possibility, still hoped next generation might mature in world where such violence was unnecessary. "I'm merely man who learned shooting straight, son. Important matter is your family achieving freedom. That's what matters." Yet even as speaking words, Isaiah knew they weren't entirely true. He had become something beyond merely man with rifle. He had become symbol, representation of what freed slaves could accomplish when granted opportunity, fighting for own liberation. Martha Washington approached as soldiers prepared escorting them to safety. Eyes were bright with gratitude tears, yet also deeper understanding of what this man had sacrificed protecting people like her family. "Mr. Freeman, I don't know how thanking you. You preserved our lives tonight." Isaiah stood, shouldering rifle with casual ease of long practice. "You need not thank me, Mrs. Washington. Assisting people finding freedom. That's what I was born performing. War merely provided different tools accomplishing it." That statement's truth resonated through small group. Isaiah Freeman had not been created by war. He had been revealed by it. Courage, skill, unwavering commitment to justice had always existed, awaiting appropriate moment emerging. As group prepared departing marsh, Isaiah took final look at battlefield where 5 slave hunters had met end. He felt no satisfaction in deaths, only grim acknowledgement that justice had been served. These men had chosen earning livelihood, stealing others' freedom, and ultimately that choice had cost everything. Mist began lifting as dawn approached, and through clearing air, Isaiah could perceive initial sunlight, he hints, filtering through cypress canopy. It seemed fitting somehow, darkness yielding to light, death yielding to hope. Yet even as they walked toward safety, Isaiah knew war remained far from conclusion. There would be additional battles fighting, more lives protecting, more hunters requiring hunting. Rifle on shoulder would speak again before this conflict ended. 3 months later, story of Georgia Marsh events had spread through both Union and Confederate camps like wildfire. In Union ranks, Isaiah Freeman had become more than legendary sniper. He was symbol of what freed slaves could accomplish when granted opportunity fighting for own liberation. Confederate soldiers whispered name in darkness, knowing Ghost could be watching from any tree line, any rooftop, any shadow. Tale had grown in telling, as such stories always do. Some versions depicted Isaiah killing dozen slave hunters single-handedly. Others claimed he had rescued entire wagon train of refugees. Yet core truth remained unchanged. Man born into slavery had become one of Union Army's most feared warriors. Yet story mattering most was told around different campfire type, in entirely different place. Washington family had reached safety in Pennsylvania refugee camp, learning reading and writing, preparing for new lives as free citizens. There, on cold December evening, Martha Washington sat with newly arrived refugee group, sharing tale of escape through Georgia marshes. The refugee camp was sprawling collection of tents and temporary buildings, housing hundreds of former slaves who had made dangerous journey northward to freedom. It was place of hope and hardship, where people treated as property learned considering themselves human beings with rights and dignity. Appeared from nowhere. Martha told them, voice carrying absolute truth weight. Like vengeance angel sent by Lord himself. 5 armed men hunting us like animals, and he stopped them all with nothing except rifle and courage. Refugees listened with rapt attention, eyes wide with wonder and hope. These were people knowing only oppression and fear for most existence, a notion that one of their own could stand against oppressors with such devastating effectiveness filled them with something rarely dared feeling, pride. Among listeners was elderly man named Josiah, arrived at camp mere days earlier. His back still bore whip scars, and eyes held haunted look of someone witnessing excessive cruelty. Yet as listening to Martha's story, something changed in expression. What became of him? Josiah asked, voice barely above whisper. This ghost, where is he currently? Martha smiled, though eyes held touch of sadness. Still fighting, I imagine. Still protecting people like us. Soldiers claimed he was excessively valuable to war effort, remaining stationary. She was correct. At that precise moment, Isaiah Freeman was positioned in Church Bell Tower outside Atlanta, rifle trained on Confederate supply depot 2 miles distant. He had watch facility for 3 days, learning guard patterns, calculating wind speed and bullet drop, preparing for shot disrupting Confederate supply lines for weeks. Bell Tower was cramped and cold, yet offered excellent target area view. Isaiah had made himself as comfortable as possible, knowing hours or even days might pass awaiting perfect opportunity. Patience remained greatest weapon, more valuable than any rifle or scope. Yet even as focusing on military objectives, Isaiah's mind often drifted back to that marsh night. Not to violence or killing, but to moment when little Thomas inquired about fame. Boy's innocent question had forced Isaiah confronting truth he had been avoiding. He was becoming something larger than self, symbol carrying weight far beyond individual actions. Responsibility of that symbolism weighed heavily on shoulders. Every shot taken, every mission completed, every Confederate officer eliminated contributed to legend, inspiring enslaved people across South believing freedom was not merely dream, but achievable reality. Back in Pennsylvania, Rebecca Washington had become something of celebrity among refugee children. She would gather them sharing story of night, ghost saved her family, young voice painting vivid pictures of courage and justice triumph.